and welcome to Brand Film Live Scene 5, where you can get exclusive insights into crafting branded content from experts in storytelling and marketing. I'm your host, Alexis Wierenga, producer for Brand Film, brought to you by PR Week and Campaign US. Joining me today is Lindsey Hagen, executive producer and head of creative development at Stept Studios.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here, Lindsey. I'm so glad it worked out to meet up in New York here. You're based in Los Angeles?
Yes, Stept is headquarters in Los Angeles, and we also have a location in Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
Oh.
Yeah, our mountain retreat.
That sounds like a really great place to have anher office that is just not as common between just New York and LA or something like that.
We just did our company retreat, and it was a ski trip up in Jackson.
That is amazing. Stept Studio sounds like a great place to work. So the 2020 Brand Film Awards are coming up on May 7th in New York. We'll have the workshop, and we'll have an award celebration at night. And Lindsey, I know you're a juror this year. Anything that you're hoping to see or excited about Brand Film, trends you're seeing lately?
Sure. I mean, what I look for first and foremost is story. I think there's the chicken and the egg argument here with storytelling and in the branded space. So what comes first? Is it a really great story or is it a marketing campaign? So what I really look for when judging is something that leads with story and also ties seamlessly into marketing in a really natural, unabrasive way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Having just content that people want to watch and connect with on that level.
Yes, and whether a logo's there or not, the brand messaging should be able to come through clearly.
If you're interested about participating next year, submitting content, or coming to the awards to see what actually comes through with the best stories, visit brandfilmlive.com. You can get tickets to the awards, to the workshop, where we'll have more conversations like this on Brand Film. So now we'll get into our conversation today, which is kind of, Lindsey, from your view on the filmmaker storyteller perspective and representing filmmakers and marketing to brand and agency partners on their behalf. Starting from the beginning, how does the best branded content originate?
I think where I've had the most luck is when the marketing piece is derived from a story first and foremost. So that is a story that's either coming to us at Stept as a piece coming directly from the source, so the subject themselves, or a director is coming to us saying, I have this amazing story, will you help me manipulate the creative to a certain degree so that it can fit a marketing campaign, while also being mindful of keeping the story intact. So I think the most successful branded pieces are coming direct from the source.
Yeah. Is that... thinking about that creative side of it, is that a struggle? Does it come together easily, or is it kind of different each time?
Yeah, it really comes down to a gut check. Any story that comes across my desk, I have this internal gut check every time. Is this something that's compelling or interesting and engaging today and now, given the storytelling climate that we're living in? And if it's not, then it probably won't do well as a branded piece. And that comes down to anything you hear in the news, anything you hear on a podcast, on your commute to work. If it's interesting to you, the likelihood of it being interesting to a wider general population is pretty good. So it really comes down to that gut check. If it's interesting to you, it's probably going to be interesting to a brand's audience as well.
Yeah. So when getting into branded content, where do you draw the line then between a commercial and branded film branded content?
That's a great question. So I think there's a fine line between a doc piece that can be sold in as a branded content marketing asset, and that typically comes from the story first. Whereas a commercial, the main objective is to sell through a product, and brand messaging is number one. A lot of times with commercial, we're seeing, casting calls is the way to get the talent. Whereas a lot of branded content work we do, the story comes first, and then we're reaching out to brands and publishing partners to see where the best fit is for that story and where is it going to be most organic.
So then, thinking about a brand that maybe hasn't done this kind of marketing before, what advice would you offer to them if they're shifting into branded film and the steps to success, and being not afraid to not have their branding all over it and still trust that their brand message will come through? What advice do you have there for entering that realm?
Yeah, I would say if you're wanting to do a branded content piece that's driven through real life storytelling and real authentic people in the flesh, start with those people. So go through documentary filmmakers. And what's interesting here is a lot of documentary filmmakers actually don't have access to those brands, or they don't have access to the agencies. So that's where a partner like Stept Studios or production entity really comes into play, because we're that intermediary between the agencies, the brands, the sales teams, the creative directors, and the filmmakers themselves. So I would say if you're wanting to get into branded content, find a partner that has access to the storytellers on the ground, the stories in the flesh, but understand the marketing language and your objectives, and understand how to elevate a piece cinematically and push it out to the masses in a way that not only is emotionally engaging, but also has potential to sell through a product.
Yeah. So then thinking from the filmmaker's perspective on that, are there ways that, filmmakers are coming up short coming into this area, or things, I guess you said like learning that lingo, but it's also, is there ever like creative pushback or something like that, of people being afraid to partner with a brand maybe?
Sure. I think there are a few road bumps that independent filmmakers can run into. And one that's not having access to agencies or brands. They don't know where to start. So they have these amazing, really passion-driven stories, but they're not seeing the light of day, or they're having a really hard time seeing the light of day because they don't have access to the people who are putting the budgets forth in the marketing campaigns. So I would say from a filmmaker perspective, find a production representative who will represent you, who will shop out your stories to those agencies, to those brands, and can also work with you to adapt the creative while still keeping it intact. Because in the branded space, and coming from the doc world, we're dealing with real people's stories. These are people's lives that are, for more or less, being used as sales assets, to put it bluntly. So we have to be so mindful when you're curating those stories. One, transparency with brand expectations and the filmmakers you're working with. And two, knowing where to draw the line. When is it pushing a marketing objective too far onto a real story? And is that crippling the essence of the story? Is it putting the subject of our film, who isn't an actor, isn't someone who is casted, is it putting them in an uncomfortable situation? And that's kind of where my role comes in, because I'm selling through essentially passion projects coming through filmmakers, and being that intermediary between agencies and brands, knowing that they can still meet their needs, these filmmakers can still see their projects through, but it's a fine dance.
What sort of complexities do you run into then with drawing that line? Do you have examples of where it's like worked out really well? You feel like something like really came through with a lot of, like, a passion project truly came through, but the brand like came in like such a meaningful way too.
Sure. So I actually have a film that just launched today on International Polar Bear Day. It was in the Brand Film Festival last year. It's called Bear Existence, and that was a film that was derived from the filmmaker. So our director is Max Lowe, and he brought us a concept. He wanted to tell the behind-the-scenes story of the biologists working on the ground in Churchill, Canada, to fight towards polar bear preservation. He brought us a story. We worked with him to help craft the story in a way that could be presented to brands as a compelling marketing piece, and also a really powerful film. And this is a film that would go on to festivals, but have 400 cut downs that can be used in a variety of ways for a variety of channels as a marketing tool. So we worked with a filmmaker who had this amazing story, very timely story with climate change and how the polar bears are being affected, and we crafted it to be a really amazing marketing campaign. Brought it to Canada Goose, who had a natural affiliation with the story. They provide all the jackets for the biologists up in Churchill, and this organization called Polar Bears International. So there's already a natural affiliation there, so it made perfect sense. We brought it to Canada Goose, sold through the project. It ended up being a very successful 20-minute film, but from that, we had 400 cut downs that all serve very specific purposes. It's a landing page on their website right now. There's a massive campaign with Vogue to support the film. We just did a release event in Los Angeles with Kate Upton, who came on to support the project as well. So that just goes to show when there is that level of transparency between the filmmaker, clearly and explicitly making their goal well known from the get-go, working with a production partner who can then package it and then speak the language that's going to translate to the creative departments, to the heads of marketing at these larger corporations. And then, of course, working with brands that get it. Canada Goose is a great example of that. And there's so many wonderful brands that are really in tune to what makes a good story, and understanding that maybe there will not be a direct ROI on your 20-minute film, but you can make really intentional cut downs that serve specific purposes to get your ROI, whether that's product integration or live activations. There's ways for you to see the return on your investment aside from your hero film. So that, I would say that was a big success story for us, and that's online right now.
Yeah, that ties in with, PR week. We have a conference is all about purpose, and then we also have the Purpose Awards, and so it's been hot on our minds a lot too with thinking of events with PR week. But there's such this theme of like brands who have purpose, like just you see like them really excel, and like projects like this, like they go far because Canada Goose can be seen as a brand that has like tied to purpose. Mm-hmm. Do you think it would be like, is that like even before you even think about brand film, like do brands kind of have to have internally together like what they stand for and like what their goals are besides like just financial goals, but like what their brand reputation is, I guess, and beyond that of like meaningful purpose?
We're looking at RFPs every single day, and sometimes brands have a really good scope of a really good handle on what their messaging is and how they want to represent themselves to the world. Sometimes brands aren't quite sure at all, and that's okay. And that's where I think transparency and having a very open conversation with filmmakers and your production partners is super helpful, because we have an objective view of the brand from the outside as consumers. So to be able to open up that conversation, I think, can really help both parties grow. And at the end of the day, when we're making a film for any of our brand partners, we're almost acting as an extension of their brand, because we need to understand how they think. We need to understand the brand ethos, especially when we're putting that emotion into a storytelling piece. So it's really just understanding how to speak one another's language and having open, transparent dialogue so that we can most effectively problem solve and fill the gaps from a storytelling perspective.
Have there, without, getting you into potential trouble, have there been times when you're like, the story just isn't right for this brand? Like, even though there's interest there, like we advise you, like it's going to backfire on you if you try to do this or something?
Yes. Oh boy.
Maybe you don't have to name names, but
I won't get specific. A lot. So it comes two ways. Sometimes a brand will come to me and say, here's our brand objectives. Can you find stories that check these boxes, essentially? So then what I do, I have a team of researchers and developers who will come back having found stories, but stories that aren't so focused on just meeting their objectives, but are really strong standalone stories, something you and I would want to watch at a film festival or on TV, whether it had a brand attached or not. So we'll basically flush out all those stories, and the hope there is that those stories do have a great alignment with their brand ask, because the brand ask came first. Mm-hmm. Another way of looking at this is starting with a story. So I have a laundry list of 150 stories right now that are all amazing, compelling stories. For every single story that I have on this docket, I'm assigning about 50 brands very strategically who I think would be a good fit based on their marketing objectives, how they're positioned in the space, what sort of content does their audience demand, and where is the company going. So it's a very strategic dance, and it's an interesting hybrid between sales, marketing, strategy, and documentary filmmaking.
I know. I hear the story too of, because it does seem like it really does fit together well, because I have friends who are independent documentary makers, and then the struggle they have is, access to audience, funding and resources. So it seems like it's naturally like bring them together, like brands who want to tell great stories and people who know how to tell great stories.
Yes. It's the perfect marriage if it goes well.
Exactly.
And where the production partner comes in is I think of us as the matchmaker. So let's say you have two friends. You really think they get along. They have a lot in common. That's your story, and that's your buyer, whether that's the brand or the agency. So all I'm doing, I have both ears open all day long, and I'm looking at stories, and I'm listening. This is what I want. This is what I want. Oh, you both are looking for the same thing. This is a match made in heaven. I think we should probably make a film. But it's as easy as just listening and not forcing. I think in sales, what I've learned is people are very prone to forcing something when it doesn't quite fit, rather than listening and filling the gap accordingly. Mm-hmm. So that, I would say, as that production partner, as that representative of both the brand and the filmmaker, the best thing you can do is listen rather than forcing something on your partner.
So then are you in, when you make these matches, are you in on that intro conversation guiding it? Absolutely. Or are you involved through the whole process?
I garner stories. So I'm fleshing out stories. I'm reading through stories all day long, every single day, whether it's coming from the director or the subject themselves. And then I'm facilitating the development. So we're putting together decks and approaches that are specialized to meet brand needs. So I'm on phone calls all day long. One side of the phone is the filmmaker, the other side is the brand. So I'm hearing the wants and desires, and I'm hearing in the other ear what we have on the table. And then I'm filling the gaps accordingly. So an example of this, I had a woman reach out to me a few years ago, a trans woman who was going to do the 7 summits, the highest peak on every continent, because she wanted to come out of the shadows and really relinquish her identity. And she wanted to be an icon for generations of trans women to come. So having been in conversation with Erin for 2+ years, I was waiting for the right opportunity to tell her story. Finally, 2 years later, a brand request comes in, perfect match, and we're off to the races. And that's a film that'll be coming out in the next 2 months. So that's an example of really having your subjects back and having their best interests in mind, but also having your clients back and having their best interests in mind. Yeah, and it's almost like acting as a therapist / matchmaker because, and then it's really empowering because you're making your clients happy and you're making the subjects really happy. And for a lot of those subjects in the branded space, this opportunity to share their story on a global or national scale is one of the largest opportunities they'll ever have, and it's so empowering to them. So it is extremely important as a representative of story and selling story as an asset that you keep their best interest in mind and do your due diligence to make sure the creative isn't going to shift in a way that could hinder them.
Yeah. So then thinking about, the movie that's coming out in 2 months, are you still involved in that process now too as it's
yes.
coming to audiences?
Yeah, so stories like that, especially when a subject reaches out to me, I stay very involved. Creative oversight throughout the entire production. I'll put together a team, and that's, director, cinematographer, editor, that I feel like is really the best team for the job. And I'm consulting both the brand and the subject to make sure they feel comfortable. So for example, for that story, we brought in a director who specializes in telling stories in the queer community. Because that's what was going to make our subject feel most comfortable and validated. So that was my job, to not just sell through a story and walk away.
Okay, you've matched. Hope everything works out well. Happily ever after.
Right. Well, right. And it's your job to kind of make sure the person you set them up with doesn't hurt them.
Yeah.
and likewise, you set the standard, you raise the bar, and then you bring everyone up together. And then it's a win-win at the end. So I like to see all those projects through from beginning to end. Because when I make an agreement to sell through someone's story, I'm kind of making an agreement to them like, hey, this is going to work out okay. You have my word. And same with the brand partners. This subject, I have a really good gut check on them. They're a really good person. This is going to make for an amazing film. Let's work together on this. So you kind of give them your word, you follow it through. So I would love to stay involved beginning to end, best case scenario.
So then when it gets to the part of distribution, what role do film festivals play in that space for branded content?
That's a great question. Some of our best branded pieces have, when a brand partner comes on, typically they're putting ad spend behind the production. So they're pushing out some of those shorter cuts, driving traffic back to the main film. Maybe it lives on their YouTube, their Vimeo, or maybe they created their own landing page. Sometimes they're partnering with third-party publishers and they have a paid media spend there. But where we really see these films have a really emotional lifespan and a longer tail is when we can also push them through the film festival circuit. So this film Bare Existence that we just did with Canada Goose, that did a whole year-long festival circuit all over the world before it launched digitally. We did another film called Adventure Not War a few years back. That was a branded film. It actually had 7 brands attached that all had their individual assets for their own sales purposes, sales marketing purposes. That film went on to Tribeca and had another global film festival circuit, and I think it was in 50+ festivals all over the globe. So these branded films, if they can stand on their own in a film festival and an audience can appreciate them sitting in the theater, the likelihood of people being able to appreciate them online or as an emotionally driven branded piece, I think is just this litmus test of, yes, this is raising the bar. Yes, there's a higher standard of production here. So in a perfect world, I think we're doing both. We're doing a digital online campaign, but we're also having it go through festivals because the piece is so strong it can stand up to the caliber of films in a festival.
I mean, in your experience, has there ever been like, you know, maybe festivals being hesitant to give space to branded content, or do you think branded content has like earned its spot somehow?
That is a great question. I'm seeing both. I'm seeing festivals such as yours where it's a space that is curated for the branded content world, and it's and you're raising the bar. You are creating a demand for higher caliber branded content, which I think is wonderful. But then you look at a film festival like Tribeca, they're not necessarily looking for branded films. You know, they do have their brand film entity, but the story is going to come first, regardless of what brand is attached to it. I've had festivals reach out to me and ask that I remove brand logos at the front of the film because they're worried that it will deter an audience as a piece that's been like kind of sold out. Mm-hmm. So you have to be very intentional about how you package your assets. If it's going to go onto film festivals, just put your logo at the end. You can still have a branded film, and if the story is strong enough, it will get in. But I would say from a strategy perspective, I would put the logos and the branding at the end. But of course, product integration, that can be woven throughout seamlessly, and it wouldn't be distracting to an audience in a festival setting.
Yeah. I know, because sometimes when you think, oh, if you can't have a commercial, which is, it goes to product placement, you're just going to see people like strategically holding up a Diet Coke like in front of like I feel like I notice that sometimes, but like getting into brand film, it's so much more than that, and there can even be, you never even see the brand once on the screen or something like that, and it still gets the brand message through. It's not just product, like, look at this logo.
Yeah, you know, it's so funny. I think it's a little archaic when brands are so adamant about product placement, because if it's coming from your channels and you're targeting your audience, you don't necessarily need to plug your product. It's going to drive back to your website anyway. It's going to drive back to sell through, especially if you're being really intentional about the assets that you're pulling out of that production. So I don't think you necessarily need to have product placement. Although if you do, there's ways to do it seamlessly.
Do you think there's ever a risk of trying to be too subtle with their branding? Has that ever been an issue, or would you say like err on that side?
I would say err on that side. Mm-hmm. I think what I see a lot of is brands wanting to get into the branded content space and erring too hard on the side of brand messaging to the point where it feels it's kind of like a poorly executed commercial, but it's not good enough to stand alone as a film, and it's a very fine balance. And when you start curating the story too much, when you start feeding lines to the subject of the film, or you start pushing product in places that, you know, maybe that isn't as organic, that's when your audience starts to become a little distracted. In an ideal world, you are pushing out a really beautiful, compelling story that is in line with your brand identity, and it's coming out through your channels, and that's very transparent and obvious. So you don't need to be super overt in the piece itself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's like the perfect world right there.
Yeah, exactly. Just letting it natural, like you said, like those natural partnerships where you're like, they already had this kind of, the coats were there already. It wasn't like everybody quick change into your
and if it's a good match and the story is true to the brand identity, then it will succeed and it will do well on its own.
Exactly. So, you know, you're in on these conversations from start to finish. How can you continue to make these conversations easier between filmmakers and clients? What do you think are like those keys for partnering together?
Yeah. I think for clients, understanding what you're looking for, and if you don't quite know what you're looking for, then having those transparent conversations with your production partner or your filmmakers. You know, this is what we're going after, but we're open to seeing options. And I think we're so focused sometimes on this perfection of having, you know, a really structured marketing campaign. I think if we can start with just our overarching goals and see what comes to the table that falls within each vertical, then we can slot content that is really powerful and really strong without curating it so rigidly that it kind of loses its essence. So I think transparency from brands and same with filmmakers, and educating filmmakers and letting them know that there's a certain echelon of production that needs to take place for brand marketing dollars to support your project. And if you can find a production partner that speaks that language and can act as an intermediary between the two, you're going to be in a much better spot.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think the future of branded content looks like? Are there hopes you have for what you want to see more of, or where do you think it's heading?
Yeah. I don't think it's going to go away. I think the consumer is extremely emotionally driven today, and even more so. Our attention spans potentially are getting shorter by the day, which is a little scary. I think things will maybe get shorter, but that's not to say that you can't still make a 12-minute, very compelling film as long as you're being really strategic about, like I said, those cut downs. I think it's going to continue to skyrocket. And I think the more that brands and filmmakers alike can continue to understand and work together to build that space, I think we open up a world of potential for bringing really amazing stories into a space that used to just sell products, but now we're selling, ethos, and we're selling brand identity, and we're selling like the heart and the core of what makes us brands, which is people. But behind every brand are people, and those are living, breathing, emotionally driven people. So I think if we can remember that, the future of branded content will look really good.
Yeah, and I know your focus is a lot on the documentary part of it. Do you think we'll continue to see more like fictional or like scripted
I hope
branded
so.
content? Or like,
I hope so. I think I love the idea of doing more scripted branded pieces, and there's a few brands that are doing it and doing it really well. I think especially in that space, finding a phenomenal filmmaker, a proof of concept. That's not something I would have like an in-house team tackle at a brand or an agency. You really have to lean into the filmmakers and give trust because that is their specialty. That's their profession. So as we start to explore new mediums for branded content, I would encourage brands and agencies to lean into the professionals, the filmmakers, but know that guidance is still welcome, and we're all learning how to speak this language together. So, the opportunities, I think, are exponential.
Yeah. Well, the future of brand film is bright and growing. So we'll wrap it up on that note. Thank you so much, Lindsey, for being here today to talk brand film and your experience and all the projects you're working on. Definitely, and keeping an eye out for the Polar Bear film coming. What was it called?
Bare Existence.
Bare Existence. Yes, that coming out soon. I want to remind everyone, head to brandfilmlive.com if you want to see more of what the entries look like, what will be at our workshop, and what our awards, kind of what has risen to the top of brand film in years past, and what you can look forward to this year and hopefully beyond as it continues to grow and brands kind of learn how to do it even better. Thank you again, and thank you for listening to Brand Film Live.